When I was 17, my family packed up and moved 2 states away without telling me. They left a single piece of paper on the empty kitchen counter. It just said, "You will figure it out." 12 years later, after I finally built an empire from the ashes they left behind, they decided it was time to reconnect. The email pinged on my phone while I was standing in a massive ballroom, approving lighting designs for a multi-million-dollar charity gala. The sender names were Arthur and Beatrice, the two people who gave me life and absolutely nothing else. I stared at the short subject line on my glowing screen. "We need to talk about your success." My pulse stayed perfectly steady. I locked my jaw, forwarded the message straight to my attorney, and blocked the address. Then I put my phone in my pocket and went back to work. The silence lasted exactly 2 days. On Thursday morning, my doorman handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside was not an apology. It was a demand. At 29, I run a high-end event production agency, controlling the city's most exclusive galas from my luxury penthouse. Arthur and Beatrice had tracked my press features, and they wanted their cut. The letter was drafted by a cheap lawyer, citing our state's filial responsibility laws. They demanded a parental tax of $500,000 to fund their early retirement, claiming they were entirely destitute and I was legally obligated to pay for their care. If I refused, they threatened to drag my elite brand into a messy, highly public lawsuit. They thought I was still that terrified, abandoned teenager. They forgot that I deal with demanding, narcissistic elites for a living. I refused to negotiate. I called my brother, Lucas, who I had recently discovered was also still trapped in their web, and told him to brace for impact. A war was coming. Arthur and Beatrice quickly realized legal threats were not enough to make me flinch. They pivoted directly to psychological terrorism. They could not just walk past my building's concierge. Instead, Arthur spent 3 hours sitting in his car, waiting to tailgate a resident into the underground parking garage. He slipped through the closing gate, dodged the security cameras, and climbed 30 flights of stairs via the fire exit. It was a terrifying display of how far he would go to prove I was not safe. When I opened my front door the next morning, I found a package sitting on my welcome mat. Inside was a jar of cheap, generic peanut butter and a handwritten note. A little snack, just like old times. "Don't forget where you came from. Pay up." The smell of that peanut butter instantly dragged me back to a freezing, pitch-black metal storage unit where I huddled at 17, eating it with a plastic spoon just to survive the winter. My chest tightened, but the memory only lasted a second before my grip hardened. The plastic jar cracked under the pressure of my hands. I threw it in the trash. That twisted joke from my past was sealing their financial doom in the present. I drove straight to Clara and Lucas's house. Lucas confessed they had been bleeding him dry for years, secretly co-signing loans in his name and terrorizing his wife. It was no longer just about my money. It was about my real family's safety. Instead of fighting the $500,000 extortion lawsuit head-on, I played the victim. I had my lawyers call theirs. We acted panicked. We offered a settlement trust. I agreed to pay the $500,000 on one strict condition. To legally validate their claim of absolute poverty, Arthur and Beatrice had to sign and notarize federal financial affidavits detailing every cent they owned. Blinded by greed and smug entitlement, they signed the paperwork within 24 hours. They truly believed they had won. One click of a sent email, and the trap snapped shut. My lawyers never funded the trust. We took their sworn affidavits straight to the IRS and state prosecutors. My private investigator had not used magic hacking to look into their lives. He simply followed a very sloppy paper trail. He noticed Beatrice had recently posted public photos wearing a $15,000 Cartier watch, despite claiming absolute poverty. A quick public records search showed Arthur had transferred the deeds of 3 rental properties into his sister's name, a cheap shell game to dodge old creditors and hide their cash flow. By signing those documents to extort me, they committed textbook federal tax evasion and perjury in writing. Their greatest strength, their boundless arrogance, had just become a federal crime. Unaware of the IRS trap closing around them, Arthur and Beatrice decided to force my hand. The night of my biggest charity gala of the year, they bypassed security by bribing an assistant caterer to slip them through the service entrance. They marched into the glittering ballroom in cheap formal wear, aiming straight for me. They planned to scream, cry, and play the victims in front of my wealthiest clients. They smirked, thinking they held the ultimate trump card of public embarrassment. They forgot I controlled the room. I caught sight of them before they could make a scene. I gave a sharp nod to my elite security team. Instead of grabbing a microphone and causing a theatrical scene, I let my guards flank them instantly. I stepped up to them, speaking just loud enough for the horrified VIP guests nearby to hear. My egg donors, who abandoned a child in an empty house, have arrived to collect their ransom. Arthur's smirk vanished, replaced by a terrifying, pale sweat. Beatrice instinctively tried to hide her face behind her clutch. The wealthy crowd stared in visceral disgust. Security grabbed them by the arms and dragged them backward out of the double doors in total silence. I did not return to the party right away. I walked straight into the kitchen, found the catering manager, and gave him an ultimatum. Fire the assistant who took the bribe immediately, or I blacklist the entire company. The traitor was gone before the dessert course. The humiliation was not enough for them. The next morning, desperate and enraged, my parents launched a final nuclear strike. They impersonated concerned neighbors and filed a highly detailed false child protective services report against Lucas and Clara. They hoped the state would remove my 4-year-old niece, Lily, placing her in their custody as leverage. There were no magical subpoenas or weeks of waiting. My investigator went straight to their cheap motel, slipped the front desk clerk a $100 bill, and pulled the lobby security footage. It clearly showed Arthur sitting at the motel's public computer at 7:14 in the morning, the exact minute the anonymous online report was filed. Filing a malicious child protective services report is a felony. Combined with the federal perjury documents, we handed the police time-stamped, irrefutable evidence. By noon, the authorities executed a quiet, methodical warrant. As Arthur and Beatrice packed their bags to flee town, the door gave way. Arthur screamed about his rights as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Beatrice sobbed hysterically, sinking to the carpet. I stood safely behind the police line. My face remained completely blank. I watched them lose their freedom, and I felt nothing but the clean, cold air of justice. The consequences were absolute. The judge sentenced Arthur and Beatrice to 5 years in the state penitentiary. The IRS seized the 3 rental properties they had tried to hide, freezing their hidden accounts and completely dismantling the lavish retirement they tried to extort from me. Lucas, Clara, and Lily were finally safe. They officially relocated to a beautiful home just 20 minutes from my penthouse, entirely free from the financial and emotional leeches that had drained them for a decade. 6 months later, a letter arrived at my office. It had a cheap, government-issued stamp and a return address from the state correctional facility. The handwriting belonged to Beatrice. I did not open it. I did not wonder if it contained an apology, a curse, or another manipulation. I walked over to the shredder, fed the unopened envelope into the steel blades, and watched it turn into confetti. That Sunday, we celebrated Lily's 4th birthday in my living room. I stood by the kitchen island, watching my brother laugh as he spun his daughter around. My sister-in-law poured wine, smiling warmly at our friends. I looked around my home. It was once a fortress of solitary survival, a place I built to keep the world out. Now, it echoed with the noise of real, chosen family. We are conditioned from birth to believe that the title of mother or father comes with an unbreakable, lifelong warranty of respect. Society tells us that blood is a mystical bond, an unseverable tie that demands our endless patience, our endless forgiveness, and too often, our endless suffering. But the truth I learned at 17, freezing in a metal storage unit with nothing but a plastic spoon and a jar of peanut butter, is that biology is just an accident of timing. It is not a debt you owe. When Arthur and Beatrice came back into my life 12 years later, they did not see a daughter. They saw an automated teller machine. They saw a resource they believed they had cultivated through their abuse. This is the ultimate twisted logic of the narcissist. They will set your house on fire, watch you painstakingly rebuild it from the ashes with your own bare, bleeding hands, and then show up a decade later demanding the master bedroom because they provided the spark. People ask me how I could stand in that gala, looking at the people who created me, and hand them over to federal authorities without shedding a tear. The answer is simple. I did not destroy my parents. They destroyed themselves. I just stopped throwing my body over the landmines they were stepping on. Through this nightmare, I did not just find my freedom. I decoded the mechanics of toxic entitlement. If you are reading this and you are shrinking yourself to fit into a family picture that cuts you on its shattered glass every time you smile, you need to hear these 3 rules. Rule number 1, trauma does not build character. Surviving it does, and you owe your abusers nothing for your resilience. Arthur and Beatrice tried to claim my success as their own. They genuinely believed that by abandoning me, they taught me how to swim. But throwing a child into the ocean is not teaching them to swim. It is attempted drowning. If you make it to the shore, the glory belongs to your lungs, your muscles, and your sheer will to live. Your abusers do not get to share the podium for the race they forced you to run. Rule number 2, Boundaries without consequences are just suggestions. When dealing with relentless toxicity, words mean absolutely nothing. I could have screamed at my parents. I could have written them long, emotional emails explaining how much they hurt me. They would have fed on that emotion like oxygen. Instead, I gave them a settlement trust trap. I used the law. I used the police. Narcissists do not respect your feelings. They only respect a wall they physically cannot break through. If you set a boundary, you must be prepared to enforce it with the absolute, unyielding force of a judge's gavel. Rule number 3. Forgiveness is optional. Protecting your peace is mandatory. There is a toxic positivity culture that insists you must forgive your abusers to truly heal. I reject that entirely. I have not forgiven Arthur and Beatrice, and I never will. But I am at peace. True healing is not about absolving the people who broke you. It is about rendering them utterly irrelevant to your future. I did not need their apology to buy my penthouse, to build my business, or to fiercely love my brother's family. Their apology would be as useless to me now as their presence was when I was 17. We cannot choose the hands that first hold us, but as adults, we have the absolute divine right to choose who gets to stay in our lives. I built an empire from an empty room and a cruel note. Lucas, Clara, Lily, and I are the proof that you can sever the infected roots and still grow a magnificent tree. Are you currently paying an emotional or financial ransom to someone just because they share your DNA? And what beautiful, untouchable life could you build if you finally decided to stop writing the checks? Share this story if you have ever had to become your own savior, and remind someone out there that walking away is not a failure, it is the ultimate victory.